The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't the end of America's nightmare, it was just the beginning of the fight back. Welcome back everyone to Hidden History Stories. In today's episode, we're taking you onto the deck of the USS Hornet in April 1942, where 16 Army bombers prepared to do the impossible. Launch from an aircraft carrier and strike the Japanese homeland for the very first time. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share it with anyone who loves exploring the past. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. Picture this. It's April 18, 1942, and 16 Army bombers are somehow sitting on the deck of a Navy aircraft carrier 650 miles from Japan. This should be impossible. These B-25 Mitchell bombers were never meant to take off from a ship. But here's the thing. America was desperate. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, the United States hadn't managed to strike back at Japan even once. Not a single bomb had fallen on Japanese soil. Enter Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, a guy who made impossible things look routine. At 45, he was already a legend MIT doctorate, world-famous racing pilot, and someone who'd spent his career proving that crazy ideas could work. When the military brass came up with this insane plan to launch Army bombers from a Navy carrier, most people said it couldn't be done. Doolittle said, "Hold my coffee." But here's where it gets really wild. The bombers were massive compared to normal carrier aircraft. The USS Hornet's flight deck? Just 467 feet of usable space. Picture the math problem. Take a 31 0-pound bomber, load it with extra fuel tanks and bombs, then get it airborne in less distance than most people drive to the grocery store. For 3 months at Eglin Field in Florida, Doolittle's crews practiced the impossible. Over and over, they'd thunder down makeshift short runways. The crews knew they were training for something big, but only Doolittle knew the truth. They were going to bomb Japan itself. Now, here's where the plan gets even crazier. Once these bombers launched from the carrier, there was no coming back. The aircraft were too big to land on the Hornet again. The plan called for them to bomb Japan, then continue flying west to land in China. It was essentially a one-way ticket. On April 2, 1942, the Hornet slipped out of San Francisco Bay carrying its impossible cargo. The ship joined up with Admiral Bull Halsey's task force built around the carrier Enterprise. The original plan seemed almost reasonable. Launch 400 miles from Japan, hit the targets, then fly to safety in China with just enough fuel to make it. But plans, as you know, rarely survive contact with the enemy. At dawn on April 18, everything went sideways. A Japanese patrol boat spotted the American fleet. The small vessel, the Nitomaru, was quickly blown out of the water by the cruiser Nashville. But here's the terrifying part. They'd probably radioed Japan first. Doolittle and Halsey faced an impossible choice. Launch now from 650 miles out, knowing most crews wouldn't have enough fuel to reach China? Or abort the entire mission? They chose to launch. At 8:20 a.m., with the Hornet's deck pitching in heavy swells, Doolittle's bomber roared down the flight deck. The ship was doing 20 knots into a 27-knot headwind, and his aircraft was loaded to the absolute maximum with fuel and bombs. He lifted off with literally feet of deck remaining. Behind him, 15 more bombers followed at carefully spaced intervals. Lieutenant Travis Hoover in plane number 2, Captain David Jones in number 3, each crew knowing they were probably flying to their deaths. But here's what makes this even more incredible. The Japanese had no idea they were coming. For 6 hours, 16 American bombers flew at wave-top level across 650 miles of ocean, completely undetected. At exactly 12:30 p.m. Tokyo time, Doolittle's bombs began falling on aircraft factories and steel plants in the Japanese capital. Now picture this scene. Emperor Hirohito is in a meeting with government officials when air raid sirens begin wailing across Tokyo for the first time in the war. American bombs are exploding in the distance. The psychological impact was instant and devastating. The Japanese government had promised their people that the homeland was invulnerable. Now American bombers were overhead, and there was nowhere to hide. But here's where the real nightmare began for Doolittle's crews. With fuel running critically low and a storm system moving in over China, the bombers faced their most dangerous challenge yet. Most wouldn't make it to their intended landing fields. Doolittle's own aircraft ran completely out of fuel over China's mountainous terrain in the middle of a thunderstorm. At age 45, he ordered his crew to bail out into the darkness and rain. Picture jumping out of an aircraft at night, in a storm, over mountains, in enemy-occupied territory. That's exactly what these men did. Meanwhile, across eastern China, similar scenes played out as the other crews faced their own fuel crises. Some crashed on beaches, others ditched in the ocean, several crews bailed out over mountains. Lieutenant Ted Lawson's crew crashed on the Chinese coast. Lieutenant Dean Hallmark's crew wasn't so lucky. They were captured immediately by Japanese forces. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn. The Chinese people, despite facing certain death if caught helping Americans, risked everything to save Doolittle's crews. Guerrilla fighters, missionaries, ordinary farmers, they guided the airmen through Japanese-occupied territory towards safety. These rescuers knew exactly what they were risking. The Japanese response to Chinese help for the Americans would be swift and brutal. Doolittle himself, injured and alone after his parachute landing, initially thought the entire mission was a complete failure. The bombers were lost, crews scattered, and he expected to face court-martial when he got home. He couldn't have been more wrong. Now here's where this story gets truly amazing. The raid succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Not because of the physical damage though that was real, but because of what it did to Japanese strategic thinking. Picture the Japanese military leadership's panic. Their homeland defenses had been penetrated easily. American carriers were operating freely in their waters. The response was immediate and fateful. 4 fighter groups were recalled from the Pacific to defend Japan. More critically, Admiral Yamamoto accelerated his plans to attack Midway Island. The Japanese reasoning was simple. They had to eliminate American carrier forces before they could launch more raids like Doolittle's. But here's the twist that changed everything. Just 6 weeks later, the Japanese fleet sailed into a trap at Midway. American code breakers had intercepted their plans, and the US Navy was waiting. The Battle of Midway became the turning point of the entire Pacific War. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers and most of their experienced naval aviators in a single day. Of the 80 airmen who flew the mission, 69 eventually made it home. 8 were captured by the Japanese, 3 were executed after show trials, and 1 died in captivity. Doolittle, far from facing court-martial, was promoted 2 grades to Brigadier General and received the Medal of Honor from President Roosevelt himself. But here's perhaps the most important outcome. American morale, which had been in free fall since Pearl Harbor, suddenly soared. Headlines screamed, "Doolittle doed it," and Americans finally believed they could win this war. The raid proved that with audacious planning, intensive training, and extraordinary courage, even the most impossible missions could succeed. Picture this final scene. 80 men in 16 bombers changing the course of the world's greatest war. Not through massive force or overwhelming numbers, but through sheer determination and the willingness to attempt the impossible. That's exactly what happened on April 18, 1942, the day America learned to fight back. That was the story of the Doolittle Raid, World War II's most daring mission, The daring mission that proved Japan's homeland was not untouchable and shifted the course of the Pacific War. If you found this story inspiring, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more hidden history stories. And let me know in the comments what is your favorite historical era